Just like that, a massive transatlantic trade war was on the brink. We're talking stock markets on edge, NATO allies staring each other down, and then, just as suddenly as it all began, it was over. So, what happened? This is the story of the Greenland Gambit, a really high-stakes crisis that exploded and then just vanished, all in 72 hours.
I mean, the speed of this thing was just stunning. Look at this timeline. On January 17th, the threat gets made. By the very next day, the 18th, Europe is already gearing up its response. And then, boom, just 3 days later, on the 21st, it's all called off with this vague framework. It was pure economic and diplomatic whiplash.
And yeah, European leaders were not mincing words. They immediately called this what they saw it as: blackmail. This wasn't a negotiation in their view, it was an act of coercion, and you can bet they were getting ready to respond in kind. The sheer speed of it all just leaves this massive question hanging in the air, right? What on earth just happened? In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly why this whole crisis erupted, just how serious the fallout could have been, and what this so-called deal actually means for everyone moving forward. To really get what's going on, we have to look at Greenland itself. Why has the world's largest island suddenly become this huge geopolitical flashpoint for the United States? Well, it turns out it's about a whole lot more than just planting a flag. First up, you've got the pure military angle. Greenland's location is, strategically speaking, perfect. It sits right on the shortest air and sea routes between North America and Europe. It also anchors what's called the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, a critical naval choke point. Plus, the U.S. already has Thule Air Base there, which is a vital early warning system for missile defense. It's basically an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Arctic. But, this fight isn't just about military positioning. It's about what's under the ice. Greenland is sitting on these massive deposits of rare earth minerals. And these are the elements that are absolutely critical for everything from our smartphones and electric cars to next-gen fighter jets. Since China currently dominates that market, Greenland represents a huge strategic alternative. And that brings us to the final, huge piece of this puzzle: geopolitics. As climate change melts the Arctic, brand new global shipping lanes are opening up. And guess who's moving in? Both Russia and China are aggressively expanding their presence up there. So for the US, having influence over Greenland is about controlling those future trade routes and pushing back against its biggest rivals. So faced with what they were calling straight-up blackmail, Europe didn't just fire off some angry press releases. Oh, no. They got ready to fire back with an incredibly powerful economic weapon of their own, something they call the trade bazooka. And this is the weapon they were about to unleash: the Anti-Coercion Instrument, or ACI. It's a legal tool they just put in place in 2023. And here's the kicker: it was actually designed to counter economic pressure from countries like China, not a historic ally like the United States. The fact that they were ready to use it against the US just shows how seriously they took this threat. And how it works is, well, it's brutally simple and super effective. If an outside country tries to strong-arm one EU member, the entire 27-nation bloc can retaliate as a single unit. They can slap on tariffs, restrict trade, limit investments, the whole shebang. It sends a crystal-clear message: you take on one of us, you take on all of us. And we're not talking about a symbolic slap on the wrist here. The EU was gearing up to activate over $100 billion in tariffs on American goods. This was the direct threat of a full-scale trade war, and it really seems like that's what made the White House blink. So, okay, the immediate crisis was averted. The trade war didn't happen. But when you have a near miss like this, followed by a really vague resolution, well, that has real consequences. The fallout from this whole gambit is actually pretty significant. I mean, how concrete was this resolution? Trump himself described it as pretty much the concept of a deal. Yeah, not exactly ironclad, is it? This so-called framework involves some future talks about Arctic security. But there are no specifics, no real commitments, and absolutely no guarantees. And here's the thing that gets lost in all this high-level political chess. What about the people who actually live in Greenland? While politicians in Washington and Brussels were making moves, they weren't really part of the conversation. And their opinion couldn't be clearer. A whopping 85% oppose joining the US. No deal can happen without them, and right now, that support just isn't there.
And you have to understand the sheer scale of what was put at risk here economically. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in trade every year with key allies like Germany, the UK, and the Netherlands. Threatening that created this immense cloud of uncertainty for businesses on both sides of the Atlantic.
But honestly, the biggest cost here probably wasn't in dollars and cents. It was diplomatic. Trust between core NATO allies took a serious hit. And here's the real irony. The whole gambit might have had the exact opposite of its intended effect. It pushed allies like the EU and Canada to look for other partners, strengthening ties with blocs like Mercosur and even China, the very rivals the US was trying to counter.
The 72-hour storm has passed, but the sky is definitely not clear. The underlying tensions are still very much there, and this story is far from over. So to figure out where this is all headed, here are 5 key signals you're going to want to watch. All right, so keep your eyes on those security talks between the US, Denmark, and Greenland. Watch and see if the European Parliament decides to ratify that paused trade deal. Look for any new moves by Russia or China in the Arctic. And most importantly, keep tracking public opinion in Greenland itself, and watch to see if the US starts making tariff threats anywhere else. These 5 points will tell us if this was just a temporary truce or the start of a much colder chapter. So at the end of the day, what was this? Was it some masterful stroke of deal-making that forced a critical conversation we needed to have about Arctic security? Or was it a costly, reckless mistake that damaged vital alliances for a vague, uncertain payoff? The crisis is averted for now, but the aftershocks of this 72-hour gambit are going to be felt for a long, long time.